go. So then we're back at the beginning, and then you just knitting needle in, around, through the loop, and there you go. Okay. There we go. There we go. Yeah, and then once you get the flow, you'll get it going as you go. And then it'll just come naturally. And this will be a great example to show you how the tension works. And you can see the difference visually. And then around, and there you go. There we go. Okay. Okay. There we go. So in with your stitch. Okay. The center. And then it goes through. In with your stitch. Through. In. And as you go, you remember that crisscross around. This stays on that side, and then your knitting needle goes through this one, back around, and there you go. Around, through, there we go, around, through, okay. Where you are, see how I'm holding my stitches? They also help to maneuver the tension of the stitches. Whether or not it looks like it, it's still kind of there to help. So I'm holding how I hold my finger. See how I'm using my thumb to kind of hold this? My index finger is kind of holding this. So what I'm doing is keeping my tension in place as I even hold. So see how my index finger is working this stitch? This stitch is slightly getting pulled up. Then I put my knitting needle in. And then I slightly tug on this one. Then I wrap it around the knitting needle where my index finger is still into play on the stitches, on the stitch, I mean. My finger is holding the two knitting needles like this, which is still on the stitch. And then I slightly tug my yarn, and then I move it around the knitting needle. As you can see, it's in the center. Have it move slightly over this way, slight tug, while the index finger is still holding that stitch. And then we want this knitting needle to go through that side while keeping this like this. So then we are still using our fingers. The thumb stays here, kind of there, pulling it through. The thumb is in line with this knitting needle. And then this is still holding this, pulling it over, let go, slightly tug. Let it be slightly loose if possible. So the fingers also kind of help adjust the tension. Now say you were doing it and you're like, oh my God, it just fell off. Just pick it back up. Or you're like this and you're like, oh no, it just fell off. Put it this way. So if it falls off, see how you don't grab it from this way. Don't twist it. Leave it flat. And then just put your knitting needle like that. Because if you do it the other way, it'll be twisted. You want to make sure. There you go. So just put it back on the knitting needle. Again, my fingers are still working with the stitches. And then there we go. It's harder because when you're first learning knitting, the way that you're probably, because I've seen my son do it with the two knitting needles. What you're probably doing right now is this, because you're just learning to also adjust to holding it. You're probably trying to use your lap right now, and you're going like this, and you're trying to, and your knitting needles are probably kind of like this. And so what you're doing is you're going like this right now, and then you're trying to figure out how to put the loop through. And then what you're doing is pulling it a little tighter. You're holding it like this right now. And what you're doing is you're like, okay, now how do I get it there without this side falling apart, falling way out of my stitch? So you're probably thinking, okay, now I got to hold it like this. So what you're doing is you're holding it like this, and then you're going like this, and then you're just pulling it a little tighter than usual. And it happens because you're still trying to adjust to how the stitching works. You're trying to adjust to how everything is being processed. It's not just a matter of, hey, you know, I'm knitting it a certain way. When you're processing it, you're thinking so many steps at the moment. Okay, my knitting needle, my hand is not coordinating with the knitting needles right. So now you're kind of like trying to figure out how to hold it correctly. And then your process is, but then I got to get my stitch on here correctly. I got to figure out my tension. So my best advice would be right now, don't worry about your tension. Just get the groove of how familiar you are with the knitting needles, because you can always take it out. Just relax. Find your comfortable zone on how to hold the knitting needles. Find your comfort zone, and then it'll start easing up a little more on the stitches so they're not so tight. Okay. See how this, now see, first I showed you how this hand was maneuvering and how they worked together. But now see how they're handling each step separately. One hand is specifically, see, these fingers are kind of around it, but they're just kind of there. And you're most of the weight is going on these fingers right here and these fingers right here. So you're like this, and the hands all come into play with holding the whole needle together. And then you're just kind of, okay, look at the hands. See how this is kind of just resting on my palm? See how this is on my knitting needle? And see how these two are grasping it a little more. Same with this one. Your index finger and your thumb has a little more grip on the knitting needle. Once you're relaxed and familiar with it, and you know that it's not going to fall out of your stitches, that little bit of holding it together like this will start to fade away. Will start to fade away. And the tension you're feeling on trying to concentrate on the stitches won't be as defined. So as you go, slightly, just slightly. So as you go, in, around, through the loop, center it around, through that loop right there. And then I slightly give it a little to make tugs to make sure my tension stays corrected. There we go. And you can tell too, it gives that little bit of elasticity as you go, and see how it transforms back, kind of bounces back as you're going. And this is, I cast it on 30 stitches for this one. using size 7 knitting needles. That was the recommended on the back of the label. And the great thing about a dishcloth is you can make it any size you want. You can have it any length you want, any width. It's definitely your own creation. As you can see, the garter stitch knits up pretty quickly. And then when you're casting off, just try not to make it too tight and just kind of feel the tension as you go. So all you're doing is knitting it and then just sliding over the other stitch.